Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 162, and I have a guest today because we are going to be trying to break the format with Sam Pratt. I can guarantee you before we start that we won't break the format, but it's the journey that counts, not the destination in this particular case.
And I can guarantee the format has not been broken yet. It hasn't been broken.
I
We're
think
going to
so.
drop
But
some info.
before we go into that, I actually wanted to discuss one thing that I never discussed, and this is art on the cards. I picked the Terra symbiosis as the cover art for this episode. Maybe there are some spoilers that we're going to be talking about this card. But when I put the picture in, I realized, my God, this is a social realism art on a magic card, a propaganda poster from some kind of um, invading army with the planes flying over it. It just looks like North Korean propaganda posters in some way. And then it made me think of, is the EU social symbiosis actually a socialist symbiosis or something? Art is great. I do agree with that. Okay, let's move on to the introduction of our guest. And I think that most of my listeners do know you, especially that you are a staple of our skeleton crew. So they should. But I'm going to take extra steps to introduce you. Sam Pratt is a limited grinder, but not just any limited grinder. There are two categories of limited grinders: people who grind limited are good in playing, and that's more or less it. They're excellent and they win a lot. And there's the second category of limited grinders, the limited grinders that have thoughts. And Sam has good thoughts and is absolutely happy to communicate them, which led to the birth of Rough Draft Podcast, one of my favorites of the week. Not only because it's good, but also it's on the right day where I have like a very big gap in my listening schedule. So it's a perfect combination of quality and timeliness. And I think that Sam has a very unique approach to cracking formats and thinking about cards in a more holistic way. That's why he fits so well into our Skeleton Crew, because Skeleton Crew is all about thinking holistically and trying to put cards into perspective rather than focusing on smaller things. So I think that Sam is a very good big idea person, and I thought that it would be great to have him on this podcast and talk about crafting. And we tried to craft things live. We did some data analysis beforehand, but it's going to be a bit of a different episode than I normally have. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk.
Anything I missed in your impressive curriculum of thinking, being a limited grinder, and having a podcast?
I appreciate you delineating me as a noted thoughts haver. I appreciate it.
I do appreciate that side of you. Maybe that's why I did highlight it. Okay, so I normally don't do preamble when I have a guest, but today's guest has thoughts, as we discovered earlier. So I wanted to bounce some ideas with you. And recently, there's been this back and forth about data. Different podcasts have different approaches on how important data is. Obviously, this one is superiorly biased towards using data, but I did find recently that it does annoy me sometimes when people chuck data argument as the end of any conversation. And I would like to remind people data is a useful tool. Very much like a knife is a useful tool. You don't let tools run your life. The tool is only going to be as good as the operator of that tool. If you use the beta badly, then it doesn't matter what you're talking. It's going to be still gibberish. And I think that this is something we should think more about: responsibility of using data and responsibility of doing your homework and analyzing things rather than using it to shut up the discussion. What are your thoughts about it?
I really like that you use the word homework, like do your homework with the data, because that's really how I use it. Like I make a point to close 17 lands while I'm drafting. I think it's best as like this tool that gives you this big picture story of the format. It gives you a lot of tips about individual cards, but I think where people get steered wrong a lot of the times is too directly translating the data from the tier list that you just get when you open 17lands.com/card data, translating that into a pick order or how to build your decks, or should I really like a pick order, like dictating their draft too much, because I think, especially with the more recent formats, like I think there's so much nuance in your deck's plan that's going to shift the rankings of cards against each other after pick one. Like pick one, sometimes you just need a gut check, like how good is this card versus this card as a baseline. You can use 17 lands to differentiate that, but everything gets so contextual after pick one that I think it's good to use the data, use 17 lands as a tool for understanding the format, but not relying on it to make the decisions for you.
Yeah, and I think I did some analytics on till when is the win rate a useful tool for determining what you do in draft. I found it closer to like pick 6, 7, where you're going to, especially like it all depends on your skill as a player. If you are top level player, you can just skip the data altogether. If you are still a beginner player, probably you're good to pick the highest win rate card until pick 7. But from pick 7 onwards, you start to think more of the function of the card, more of the functionalities of the deck that you're missing. And then the whole data thing goes out of the window completely, because you still want to pick good cards, but you want to pick good cards that fulfill vital niches in your deck that are not filled just yet. And this
Right.
is something that people don't, I think, do.
Yeah, that's exactly where the data sort of like falls apart, is like a pick order is it's good to do the research beforehand, because you can identify, what's the strongest card in a pack in the vacuum, and like how much do I want that versus a card that works more synergistically with what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, but and it is in the philosophy of the tool even,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a good reason why 17 Lens doesn't have an overlay. You know,
Right.
every software that does that kind of stuff will have an overlay, and then you draft, and the overlay is in your face and tells you what to do. It's a conscious choice of Rob, the leader of 17 Lens, not to have that thing. It was suggested a million times, but he always says no,
Yeah.
because he thinks that this is against the whole philosophy of the thing. 17 Lands is designed as a learning tool, not as a tool that supplements or substitutes your brain. And yeah, they always are about, look, this is a research tool, this is a tool of discovery, this is not something that will tell you what to do. And I think that unfortunately human nature is such that we want to be told what to do in many cases.
Yeah.
And that's why it is annoying to some people, which is hilarious, as it's mostly probably annoying to the people that developed it, because they don't want it actively.
Yeah.
All right, so since I have you here, I wanted to discuss a bit the metagame, and specifically the metagame of the last 2 weeks, because this is another thing that I think data is not being used very well. First week data has such an disproportional bearing of how formats are perceived. And it's not specifically linked to only that the data is like that and whatever. It's just that human nature is like that. If in week 1 green was the strongest color, this will forever become in the minds of people, and they will call the Edge of Eternity, oh, the green color. Yeah, I remember green was busted in that format. And it's not necessarily completely true. I still do remember when people were talking about, oh, you know what, like on Arena in I'm gonna go way back now, but in Thrones of Eldraine, you couldn't do anything because you just drafted those Merfolk Secret Keeper decks, and that was ruining the whole format. But in fact, after 2 weeks of that format, the bots were reprogrammed by WotC, and you couldn't get the Merfolk Secret Keeper for the love of it. And then they never reprogrammed them again, so you could force mono red every single draft. And no one remembers it as a mono red format. I do, because I played a lot of the late format, and I played a lot of mono red, and I played against a lot of mono red. But everyone else remembers, oh, it was the Secret Keeper. Because most people play only week 1, and then maybe sporadically they will draft once or twice. And those first weeks are so building. And that's
Yeah.
why we have the metagame pulse check, looking at the last 2 weeks after the first 2 weeks of discovery stage, because first 2 weeks are the most dynamic in every format. When pick orders are changing, people are figuring it out. After week 2, it's a more static environment where we can actually predictably say what's going on. And what we can see is that it's a pretty balanced format, actually. Is that your feeling when you're playing?
Yeah, no, I think it's very balanced. And I do still think there's something to be said for the initial week, 2 weeks of data. Um, Sort of telling like a baseline story of the format. Like if you just saw this chart and knew nothing else about the format, you might be tempted to say that white was the strongest color because you see like it's Simic first and then Orzhov Azorius Selesnya as the follow up, and you see like Golgari in dead last place. You might think that green is maybe not the strongest color, but I do think having the context of green was so dominant the first 2 weeks until maybe it got overdrafted or people started figuring out synergy decks or a different color. I think it's still good to have the context of green's dominance because I think, especially when you get to tougher pods, like drafting with good players, like it's good to know that green has a plan to itself and can support multiple drafters. Just that it's not like way out of balance. Like it's not so dominant that you need to be in green to do well. So I think it's definitely worth looking at sort of like the how the metagame evolves over time to get the full picture of the format. But this like pulse check, like this snapshot of the last two weeks does really match my experience with the format. Where I've been drafting white a little bit more. But really everything's very balanced, and I'm kind of just taking the cards as they come.
Yeah, this is the thing that I would like. If you are a relatively experienced player and if you would go to some kind of a minor tournament when you know that people are not invested and maybe it's the first draft, I would just force Simic in that spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would probably win quite decisively by knowing what to pick. I, in fact, did it in my FNM, and indeed, it ended 3-0. Plus, I had like a bunch of busted rares to splash from my 4 gene pollinators because I knew exactly what I'm doing. And yeah, you can prey on those kind of weak pods. But as the format progresses, this is what the metagame is. So we can't really say that green is the strongest. Green is the strongest if no one picks green, which was the case of the first week. So in the vacuum situation, it's going to be like that. In the non-vacuum situation that we find ourselves, this is the reality. Bunch of color pairs are good. And just to give to the people that are only listening, we have the top 5 in Simic, Orzhov, Azorius, Selesnya, Gruul, and Rakdos. So between 55 and 55.8%, which is not a difference that is significant in any way.
That's crazy balance. Within 1% is wild.
And then we have Izzet, Dimir, and Boros between 53.9 and 53.8, within 0.1% of each other. These are the next 3 ones. They are like 1 percentage points below the top 5. And then Golgari at the back with 52.1. Turns out that laughing it out for not having any cohesion, sense, meaning, or plot in our Skeleton Crew stream was right. And that was my feeling, that Golgari is the weakest, even though for the first 2 weeks Boros was the lowest win rate archetype. But I did at least see that some Boros decks can win, while Golgari is just like, especially with green being contested, I didn't see any way that this deck can function.
Yeah, I was just thinking like I would think the way I would want to build Golgari is just close to a mono green deck. And then just using black for the removal. But I think the problem is if green's contested, you're not going to get close to a mono green deck. And outside of the removal spells, there's not really a lot of black stuff. And the removal spells also get taken really highly too. So it seems really hard to get a functionally good black green deck at this point.
Okay, so let's go to the play rates of those decks. And I wanted to get your impressions of what do you think of that? And yeah, the most played deck is Simic with 13.2%, which is not much, honestly. We had some formats where the top played deck was like 25%. And then the second one is Dimir with 12.7%. And then there's a bunch of them around 10% with, basically all of them, apart from Izzet, Boros, and Golgari, which are like 7, 6, and 4%.
I'm shocked to see that Dimir is performing so poorly. I'm not so shocked to see that its play rate is really high. But I am shocked to see it in the bottom third of the decks because I think I've had a lot of good Dimir decks. I would guess that this is a symptom of Cryogen Relic being taken appropriately. I'm not going to say take it too high because I do think it's the best
It can't
common
be
by
taken too highly.
yeah. I think people are taking it appropriately, and I would imagine that a lot of the blue decks are suffering because of that. And I think that bears out here with Demir having a really high play rate and relatively low win rate. Same with Izzet too. And I think
Yeah,
both
I
of
think
those
that
decks really
yeah,
depend on Cryogen Relic. Yeah.
you just start drafting Dimir cards, and then you just assume that the Cryogen relics are gonna come, and then they don't, and it's a sad, sad story because those decks are not as good if they don't have it.
Yeah.
I think that you're spot on there. That I haven't seen a Cryogen relic in days. I keep some next to me just to remind
Just to
myself how
look
they
at it.
look like. Yeah, but alas, even in
And
sealed, I played like a bunch of arena directs, and I opened across 6 arena directs. I opened one Cryogen relic. I was so sad.
yeah. And then you see Simic and Azorius each performing at the top with high play rates, and those are the blue decks that don't really need Cryogen Relic to do well. Like you'll play every copy you can get, but like Simic is mostly a green Gene Pollinator deck, and I think Azorius, you know, it's kind of its own thing in this format.
Yep. Yeah, but again, the play rate looks very much balanced
Yeah,
as well,
yeah,
with probably Boros being the most easy to abuse as a if I would like the 4 is crazy for talking that the weakest archetype is always the strongest, but given the 4% draft rate, I think that he might be onto something. If the signpost is at least somewhat playable, which I think Sami is,
yeah.
this is an abusable strategy to some extent if you figure out how to build a good Boros deck. But
I yeah.
we're not going to be breaking Boros today.
No.
We leave it to the 4.
I do talk about Boros in my podcast this week, which I recorded this afternoon. So
So you do.
there's a
So
little
you
plug.
do. So you do. Rough drafts, do listen to it. But that's where we come to the breaking of the format. And people approach breaking formats in many ways. So some people are putting the reps in, and they just play hundreds of games and figure out how the format works based on their empirical experience. Some people, and I'm definitely in that group, are into theory crafting, where they look at the spoiler and they think of how can I make pieces of that spoiler of the set into working decks, and what kind of synergies are going, and where can I find those micro synergies, and how to squeeze the most out of the cards by simply using the kind of a pedant experiment uh, in the magic way. There's of course data use of breaking the format, and we're gonna probably have some of your thoughts about it later. Other people just synthesize others' ideas and try to get the best version of multiple approaches. And some people, like the 4 that we mentioned, just pick the worst performing archetype and force it to oblivion and somehow win with it. So, which is your version?
My version is I probably do the most synthesizing others with some data and some reps. Reps too, for sure. Um, I
How many
really like. Go ahead.
how many drafts are you in for this format, roughly?
Oh man, it's got to be at least 50 at this point, which honestly is probably a little light compared to some people, but uh, yeah, it's got to be at least 50.
Okay, so how do you go on about it? I know you put the reps in, you listen to other people's ideas. I'm sure that you have an impressive podcast backlog every week.
Yes, yeah. I listen to a lot of Magic content. I watch a lot of Twitch streams. I while I work, I usually have a Twitch stream open, just because I'm comfortable multitasking like that. Um, I don't multitask when I draft, though. That would be my tip for people. Yeah, it's a lot of talking with people, getting a lot of reps in week 1, 2 can help really do it. So my play group, usually the release week, I'm at the pre-release a lot of the weekend, and then my play group usually the past year of sets we've been running a paper draft on Monday night. Um, I was actually going to mention my week 1 episodes for rough drafts. I record on Wednesday and release on Thursday. And they release on Tuesday on Arena. And those are always the scariest to release because I don't on Wednesday night I have like Tuesday evening worth of drafts and like the Monday paper draft that we do and pre-release, and that's all my exposure to the format. So I'm kind of just guessing um like what I think is going to be good in the format. And that usually takes a lot of theory crafting about certain decks. I've been pretty lucky the past 3 set releases for rough drafts. If by the way, if you don't know what my podcast does, as I look at a certain concept in the format through the lens of one card. Uh, so for Tarkir, which was the first set my podcast was out. The first card I looked at was Champion of Doosan and Green Beatdown decks. Final Fantasy, I looked at Sahagin, and this format I looked at Gene Pollinator. And very lucky for me, Sahagin and Gene Pollinator, and to a lesser extent, Champion of Doosan, I think were very strong cards in each of their respective formats. So it's really about trying to. I look at the whole set. I play with the cards a little bit, and then really take a look at what sort of decks I expect to work. Like what sort of decks there's a certain theme that I think is replicable, sort of the core of each color. So Gene Pollinator, obviously I had experience with Jaspera Sentinel and Sentinel Stalwart in Call Time and Brothers War respectively. So I knew kind of what Gene Pollinator was all about, like what types of decks Gene is going to be good in, what kinds of cards you want to pair with it. So I'm really like leaning on that experience for my week 1 episodes of the podcast. For like a more holistic view of breaking the format, I make sure to take note of what I'm losing to week 1. I think that's a huge part of week 1 of Limited, because if you're paying attention to your opponent's decks and not just your own, you're getting the experience of your own deck, but you're kind of getting bits and pieces of your opponent's decks too, in your draft leagues. So if you lose to a really cool red-white deck that you think like you hadn't thought to combine the red and white cards in that way, maybe you go the next draft and you start to see that in the draft. So I think synthesizing with others, synthesizing with others, that's kind of the most important thing for me, trying to break the format early on.
A couple of small comments, and one of them is you probably undersell the Champion of Doosan a bit. I know that no one cares about the late format win rates, but in the second half of Tarkir Dragonstorm, actually Golgari was the highest win rate archetype.
Yeah.
And that was a well called thing. And then the second thing is when you were talking about I lost my plot. Let's stick with the Champion of Doosan, but there was definitely something there that I lost while I was talking about the data and trying to figure out what was the win rate of Golgari and Tarkir Dragonstorm. Oh yeah, no, I wanted to say that. Yeah, don't you have the early access possibility of making reps?
I forgot about that. Yeah, so that's another like night of reps in the draft. Even though that's a little bit.
It's a weird night, isn't it?
It's a weird night. Though I did week 1 Sahagin for Final Fantasy, and I did get that idea from getting absolutely stomped by Mark Anderson in early access by a couple 7-9 Sahagins.
You see, thank you very much for filling the void where I could regain my plot. And what I was saying, this is a very good observation. Watch your opponent's decks, because yes, you only see 40% of your opponent's deck most of the games, but each draft that you make, you on average will play 7 opponents. So you see so much more from others than you see from yourself. You can get so much more experience by looking at what other people are playing and figuring it out. I do vividly remember when it clicked for me that Whisper Squad is a good creature in the Korea after being beaten by 2 opponents in a row with playing Whisper Squad. And at first one, I was laughing and they played this garbage card. The second one, I was not laughing at all. And the third one, I just drafted myself and I won. So yeah, it's worth watching what your opponent's doing. Don't forget that your opponents are likely smart, as smart, if not smarter than you. In my case, most of the time they are smarter than me, and watching what they're doing is not a bad idea.
And it doesn't even have to be the cards they're playing. It can also just be like paying attention to why you're losing or why
Mm,
your opponents are losing too. Like if you're always running out of cards before your opponent, like you have to adjust that in the draft. If you are getting beat down, you need to draft more cheap cards. If
yeah, if
you're
you
losing
die
to
with a full handful of
yeah.
cards, that probably means that you're not playing with the rules of engagement very well.
Yeah.
This is a good thing in understanding. Like I drafted a couple of decks that were good in the late game. I knew that my late game is undefeatable, and I was just randomly chucking the lithoforming into them because I noticed that the only way I lose those games is they just spawn out like a bunch of one-ones and beat me with a white board. Litho breaking just stops them from doing that if I draw it, and cost is very minimal.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get like a lander if I need it and sacrifice Gene Pollinator. How big role does data play in your breaking of the format, quote unquote?
Yeah, it does play quite a big role, but because I was really struck by something by the way that Eduardo said it. He was on your podcast earlier this year.
Eduardo Scheigali, yeah.
Yes. Um, where he talks about the data telling a story about the format and how it's more important to look at the data like holistically than it is to drill down into like the individual card comparisons. So week one, I'm watching the data like I'm staying up till usually drops around between 11 and 12 every night. Like there's an update, and I'm like I stay up like that late anyway most nights, but I'm like watching it for when it drops, so we get like a new dump of information every day. Week one, I used to use it mostly week one because like what Eduardo was saying was that it's such a big advantage um, to have like hundreds, like tens of thousands of games of data, like a data set that's tens of thousands of games. That's so useful when you've only done maybe 5 drafts, maybe 10 drafts. Like that's such a small sample size, and maybe you've only been drafting red most of all. Like you found your niche in red. You can turn to the data to get such a more holistic view of the format, like see like what white is doing, what green is doing, etc. So a couple categories of cards that I look to the data for is like early overperformers. Um, so cards that I have not cast that seem to be doing well that I don't think should be good. And the best example for this was Sorceress's Schemes. That's like a perfect example of a card that I would not have put in my deck until I saw it was performing in the B range on 17 lands. And then it was like, okay, I at least have to try this. And there's a big difference between like just knowing the card is good and knowing where it's good. And you do need like the reps or the communication talking with others to figure out why Sorcerer's Schemes is such a good card, like where it performs well. You need that, but just getting that on your radar is a huge edge you can get from the data early. So like the first 2 weeks, it really shapes my opinion on the format, but I do try to find my own like niche in the format during that time and using the data more to get like big picture for later on. Um, the other big use of data I have is to sort of figure out archetypes that I don't really have a good handle on. So a good example in this format, I was losing a lot the first week or two of this format, by the way, um, was red green in this format. Like I was building a bunch, I was playing a lot of red green, and the decks were doing really, really poorly. And I went and sorted, you can like filter by red green. And one of the things that stuck out to me was Gene Pollinator was not a super well performing card in red green. It was like dead average. Whereas in all of the other green color combinations, um, Gene Pollinator was an overperformer. So that told me pretty immediately that like the green red decks really want to be sort of big mid range decks. Like you don't want to have a bunch of cheap cards that are gonna do like trinkety things or like kind of like Gene Pollinator is good in white green because you can put counters on it. I think that's a big part of the card there, and it's good in blue green because it fixes you to splash. But the data was very clearly telling a story of red green more as like a stompy mid range deck that wants to go like Zookeeper Mechan, Kov Landseeker, Nebula Dragon, rather than like Gene Pollinator, play some card draw, etc. And obviously, you can still build red green decks that want Gene Pollinator. Maybe you're splashing around, but that just like really clicked for me with why I was building these red green decks wrong. So the three big categories for data for me are big picture for the format. It's like a very easy way to get that. Cards I otherwise wouldn't have tried, and archetypes that I don't have a good handle on building.
And it makes absolute sense. I mean, I usually have to look at all of it because I have to give information to people who maybe have very different archetypes that they don't know how they work like. So I have to give the general overview. But I think that if you have a grasp on something, supplementing it with data is useful, but not as useful as supplementing with data something that you have no idea on how to approach it.
Right. I think
Uh,
that's a really good point. Is if you feel like you have a good intuition, like you figured out a specific deck or like three color wedge that you really like I tend to not use, I tend to rely way more on my own experiences for that. And I'm using data way more to inform myself on things that I don't have a good handle on.
and it's a normal thing also that like if you think that you know better than the data, then probably you do. Because
Yeah.
if you keep on winning with something, then you figured out your own way on how to do it.
Yeah.
If you can't do something and it doesn't work and you're losing all the time, well, then data clearly knows better than you. I was mildly annoyed. I don't know if you listened to the last Lords of Limited, the bonus episode that was released for
Oh, yeah.
everyone. And
It
they
was great.
played the clip from Ham TV, which is a great clip. I don't get me wrong. When Ham talks about using the data and he tells you, "Have you ever seen those people going to the Pro Tour that don't qualify for the Pro Tour? The little Billy and Vampire." And then he goes bashing like, "Are these the people I want to listen to?" And the first comment that came to my head was, "Well, you may say that little Billy and the Vampire are not good players and their data is pretty useless, but at least." Little Billy and Vampire figured after 2 days that Stag in Tarkir was not a good card and didn't
Shots
promote it
fired.
as that's definitely shots fired there. But this is the reality of it. Because of the number of Billies and Vampires and numbers of replications, you go sort of get a Monte Carlo kind of situation where you figure out that the card is not very good. And it's going to give you an information much quicker than you based on your 5 drafts that you played on day one. Because your
And
5 drafts on day one can be
yeah.
so skewed one way or another. And Billy and Vampire played probably 25,000 drafts on day one.
Yeah.
And you get so much information out of that it can let you figure out which cards are not as good. And there's going to be some deviation, of course, but it's so much faster in that way.
And you know, if Little Billy and Vampire play 25,000 games and Ice Cave Crasher wins a significant portion of them, you know, maybe Trample's pretty good in this format.
That's true. And the Crusher is still doing pretty well.
Yeah.
I was predicting it's a bit overinflated by the green being too available for what it's worth, but it dropped accordingly because green started being drafted more. But the card's power defended itself, and same with the Toebringer that I thought was also like not going to work. It's not like an amazing card, but it's still
No.
like a good mid-range common.
Still like relative, like if you ranked all of the green commons, they're still like punching above where we would have expected them
Mm,
before the like, they're not like pulls into green, but like compared to the other green cards, they're still
yeah.
like doing relatively well.
All right, so let's move to the main topic of the main 3 topics of the episode, really, and it is to try to build something around actually. And I think that the first card that you suggested, and I hopefully with a with the theme that you wanted to showcase us, and I feel guilty because now you suggested the card. Does it mean that this card is not going to appear in the raft drafts? Am I stealing something from
Oh
humanity, or
no,
are you going to talk about it?
I got plenty to talk about.
Okay, cool. But it's Beyond the Quiet, and this is the Wrath of God effect. 5 mana, exile all creatures and spacecraft. And I think, yeah, the problem with this card is that white looks like a rather proactive color in this format. Not aggressive, maybe, but proactive at least. And it has this theme of going wide or going tall, and Wrath doesn't seem like fitting very well to any of those themes. So how would you go on and crack it?
So my first thought with this Wrath in particular is to build a control deck. So there are a couple of really good defensive tools in white. Obviously, Banishing Light's just generically good. Focus Fire, 1 mana interaction, especially at instant speed, is so good for a control deck. If you can have all of your cheap cards be cheap interaction, that scales well. That's such a huge boon. And there's also Radiant Strike, the 4 mana destroy tap creature, gain 3, which is a card that is, I think, pretty powerful if you know you're going to be on the back foot, and also not a card that the other white decks should be interested in. So you should be able to get that card uniquely late in the draft if you're building around Beyond the Quiet. And I actually had an early access draft where I think I took Beyond the Quiet, pack one, pick one, and built a very incredible blue-white control deck with, I think, 3 or 4 Radiant Strikes. I did have like Thrumming, Hive Pool, and Weft Walking. So that deck was pretty busted otherwise, but that would be my first inclination to building a white control deck with this card. In limited though, in constructed, board wipes are basically exclusive to control decks. But in limited, especially older formats, board wipes don't necessarily need to be in hard control decks. You can also play like a mid-range deck where you're using a board wipe as sort of like a card advantage tool. Like you sort of play your game differently when you have the board wipe. You play the board wipe, you get a 4-for-1, and then suddenly you can start slamming threats after you deploy the board wipe. I think there's something there here too, where the decks aren't so aggressive that you need to, that if waiting to turn 5 to wrap the board is going to be like nail in the coffin. So I think there's also something there for like a white mid-range deck that's not super aggressive, which I think is a little bit tricky in this format as well, but could definitely come up.
Yeah, and we picked an easy one here because Beyond the Quiet is performing relatively well. I mean, it's got like 59% game in hand win rate, which is not a terrible thing to have. And I did some analysis of the cards that we are going to be talking about, and I did it in a weird way. So I took all the decks that had the card in them, and I looked at the decks that had 4 or more wins and decks that are 3 or fewer wins. And then I compared... Is that a dog?
Yeah, that's my dog.
Oh, okay.
I'll yell at him.
My dog, luckily, is sleeping comfortably in his cone because he had a surgery last week. But anyway, I took all the decks that have 4 wins or more or 3 wins or less, and then I looked at what percentage of those good decks, quote unquote, and bad decks have the particular copy of a card. And then I looked at the difference between them. So the positive difference, it means that this card is more present in the good decks, and the negative number means that this card is more in the bad, quote unquote, bad decks with the Beyond the Quiet. And when you look at the list, like one thing that really surprised me was mental modulation. So roughly 15% of the decks, the good decks had mental modulation, at least as one copy, and only 8% of them had, of the bad ones had a mental modulation. And mental modulation, if you don't remember, that's the one in the blue instant, tap target creature, draw a card, and it costs 1 less if it's your turn. I couldn't really explain that why that card would be so much more prevalent in the good Beyond the Quiet decks, but here we are. But the rest of the cards, when you look at it, like first of all, there's an island there, which means that the good Beyond the Quiet decks are more likely to be blue-white. Any surprises there?
The mental modulation is really surprising, but it kind of makes sense to think about it like the card Revitalize, which is 2 mana, gain 3, draw card in white at instant. Like mental modulation is just going to tap a creature, which effectively gains you life, cantrips. Just being able to like buy time in the early turns and sort of force the opponent to deploy more creatures onto the board to hopefully Wrath on 5. I think actually a similar card to Mental Modulation in this collection is Ilvoy Galeblade,
Mm.
which I did an episode about, mostly talking about it as a tool to pressure the opponent's life total. And I specifically mentioned that if you're not pressuring the opponent's life total, you're just like blocking, like chump blocking and sacking before damage is dealt to cantrip. Like it's basically like a revitalize, which I said was bad. But apparently here, like just casting a couple of revitalizes in the early turns is a pretty effective way to use Beyond the Quiet.
I'm actually thinking maybe this is sort of like a psychological effect because if you're playing white and you're like not playing anything to the board, an opponent goes
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
uh, that's a bit sus. But once you start doing something, oh yeah, they played
Right.
something, so I guess I have to expand my board because they are not like empty-handed and not being able to cast anything. They're doing things. I better expand my board. And people got sort of like lured into
Yeah.
playing more to the board, and then you can get the Beyond the Quiet to be like a 3-for-1 or something.
And I think other cards in here that really stand out to me. One is like Night Luminary and Codecracker Hound as warp cards. So like Light Luminary. Night Luminary is a card that you can play on 2 for a board impact. Like you get a 1/1, and then also gives you something to do after your Wrath. So like you said, if you play nothing for 4 turns, your opponent's going to pick up on Beyond the Quiet very easily. But if you're like just casting Night Luminary and then maybe some other creature or just like tapping something or removing something in the lead up sequence, like you get a little bit of defensive speed with the token, and it seems more like you're not doing anything. And I also think light. My God, I can't talk. Night Luminary plus cards like Sunstar Lightsmith, Station Monitor are also really good things to do after you Wrath. So if you can Wrath pass the turn, they take their turn, you untap, you still have this Night Luminary to clog up the board after. Or maybe after you Wrath, you can double spell with Station Monitor, Sunstar Lightsmith, and those are going to have like a much higher impact on the board if it's been cleared.
Yeah, just go Station Monitor into Night Luminary on turn 6, and you have a board that is
Exactly.
you have a board of what, 4 creatures?
Yeah, you have, I think that's 7 power on
Yeah,
turn 6, which that's awesome after you've Wrath.
not a terrible thing, but yeah, this it some of those cards did surprise me. There is another card on that list, Asteli Reclaimer. I think that you wanted to talk about that separately. We didn't make them into slides, but maybe you can talk me through that one.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too. I mean, it works really well with
So
a couple
Asteli
cards.
Reclaimer is a 5 mana 5/4 flyer
Yeah, I think it's
that
a
has warp
rare.
3, and it brings up non-creature permanent from the graveyard to the battlefield when it enters. That is, the cost is equal or lower to its the mana that was spent for it. Is that
I really
correct?
like that card. Yeah, that's right. I really like that card with Dubious Delicacy, um, which we will see in a second. I believe that Black White is a poor home for Beyond the Quiet, but getting your Delicacy puts itself in the graveyard,
Mm-hmm.
so you can get it back with the Reclaimer. I think a card not on here that I honestly might have expected to be on here would be um, Nutrient Block as another type of revitalize as well. And that's the like 1 mana artifact you can sack to gain
It
3 and draw
literally
card.
revitalized for 1 mana extra.
Yeah, yeah. That's another one that's good to get back with the Reclaimer. So I'm not super surprised to see Esteli Reclaimer on this list.
It's
But I
probably
would
good
have
enough with the relic, to be fair, and relic is there on the
yes,
list. So
yes.
now
Relic too.
keep in
Yes.
mind that maybe cards like Kraken, Relic, and Banishing Light might be high on that list because better Beyond the Quiet decks are the ones where white was open and blue was open. And it doesn't have anything to do with the synergy with the Beyond the Quiet. It's just like, yeah, if you put better cards in your deck, you're going to be win more. If the color is more open, you're more likely to put better cards in your deck. So we have to keep in mind of that particular data quirk here. And here we have the cards that are not doing so well with Beyond the Quiet. And I think that the important one here is definitely Swamp, which means that Beyond the Quiet is not going to be great in your white black shells.
I mean,
And
you
I
also
think
see a bunch of the white board affecting cards like Weftblade Enhancer and Dual Sun Adepts, which are both cards I really like, white cards I really like, but that points me to like I don't really want to play Beyond the
The
Quiet.
Lux Knight Breacher is funny. It's like,
Yeah.
what? You don't
Yeah.
need to. You don't want to go white and cast a big creature before your Wrath? That's
Yeah.
shocking. One. Ice Cave Crusher made the list.
Yeah.
Mentioned. Another
Yeah.
thing, I just don't think that white green really wants to be playing a Wrath effect. Some versions might even, but for the
Yeah.
most of it,
After a complete pile, like a white.
I would see like a Boros deck that wants Beyond the Quiet. I would definitely see that happening.
Yeah, I think so.
And
too.
then you wrath the board and then you start dropping Nebula Dragons and you take over the game like that.
Yeah.
And then again, as what you mentioned, you mentioned it in the episode or in the pre-episode talk, is the kind of deck that would want any number probably of the cheap interactions. So you want to play the 1 mana, deal 2 or 3, depending on the void status in those decks.
Yeah.
Defend yourself. Well, no, in white red, I'm talking specifically about the lava, whatever, lightning.
Oh,
Whatever.
Plasma Bolt.
Plasma Bolt, that's the one.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then you defend yourself early through those. You get to 5 mana, control the board, wait for the good opportunity, wrap the board, and start dropping chunkers.
Yeah, I would be worried about card advantage in a deck like that, but you can get around that.
Moxites, that's the way.
Yep.
Cryogen Relic at home. Command Bridge probably is there because you don't want to be playing multicolor decks, and people tend to put it more frequently than not in multicolor decks. Because it's a double pip card. You want it in a streamlined deck than anything. All right, we have a second build around card, and it's weapons manufacturing. Any experience with that?
I have not cast this card. Have you?
I did.
You did? How was it?
And sealed, not the.
Oh.
I got a pool in sealed, and I looked at it and I said, it's a pretty bad pool, but I do have a ton of black sacrificing effects, and I have this weapons manufacturing and some kind of a okay artifact shell. And I thought that my only shot in that pool at all was to build this weapons manufacturing meme deck and hope that it works. I went 5-3, I think, with it. So it was not terrible, but it did have issues in some way. But it was one of the more synergistic sealed decks I played in recent memory.
Makes sense.
And I think that the card can be successful. It has terrible numbers on 17 lands. I just
not surprised at all. Because you need two things to make this card work. You need to play artifacts, and you also need sacrifice outlets. And
47%, by the way, 47.7% win rate.
Like build arounds that only ask you to do one thing already have poor win rates. Like a build around that asks you to put two different things in your deck is going to have an atrocious win rate just because people aren't like Timmy.
There are some pluses of this one. Like, first of all, enchantments are notoriously hard to deal in this format. So if you cast it, it will probably survive till the end of the game, which is not a terrible thing. And then sacrificing can be achieved many ways, and sacrificing can be the thing that you want to be putting in your deck anyway.
Yeah.
So I guess that the only secret for me is like, how do I mix putting artifacts and putting sacrifice outlets into decks? And if I have those two conditions fulfilled, weapons manufacturing is going to be at least fine in that deck.
Yeah. And shout out to Corticalls, who talks about this on his limited level ups this week.
Of course, he had to scoop us. Classic Alex.
He mentions slag. What is it called? Slag Drill Scrapper.
Yep.
The 1 mana 1/2 in red that is an artifact itself and also can tap itself to sack artifacts to draw cards. As just the perfect weapons manufacturing.
Yeah, and I think that this is the card that if your deck wants the scrapper and you get manufacturing and you have like 10 to 12 artifacts, you probably should put the manufacturing in your deck.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a build around in the sense that you want to build around manufacturing. I think it's more like, some decks will have a spot for manufacturing in them. And I think that this is the difference that made my life easier, because when I pick a card like weapons manufacturing, I try to go all in on building around it. And I think in this and maybe in the last couple of formats, it was a trap where it's better to think of it, when I have a deck that can accommodate weapons manufacturing, I should go for it, rather than trying to build a deck that can accommodate weapons manufacturing.
Because there's a couple of things going on here. Like you need to be in black red, maybe blue red with self-craft mechan. Like those are the colors where you're going to have enough sacrifice outlets. Like blue red is already pretty sketchy. And so you need those colors to be, if you take this pack one, pick one, you need those colors to be opened, and you need the cards at the table like Umbral Collar Zealot or Slag Drill Scrapper to be opened in the first place. Like it's not guaranteed that any Slag Drill Scrappers are going to be opened. So I also like being opportunistic about this card and maybe going in on it later in the draft rather than taking a pack one, pick one and doing it early, even if that's probably a higher high if you actually get it to work.
Yeah, I think that this is exactly like the thing that you should be able to pick it up. Even if you open it, you probably should make it do the round trip of the table. If it comes back, at least you know that no one is going to be fighting over it.
That's a really good point too. Like you can try to wheel it as a test also. Just tempt everyone else at the table with this.
And if it doesn't work, it just was not meant to be.
Exactly.
And I have to say that I played against a deck that had white and red in weapons manufacturing. It was mainly red, but it had some white. And the thing that surprised me was the 3-mana 2/2 flyer that returns something to owner's hand. And they started returning the munitions to their hand. And munitions have when it leaves battlefield, not when it dies or anything.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I think I watched Siggy play against that exact deck.
Maybe.
I remember him playing against someone who was also white-red with this card.
Yeah, although I wouldn't recommend that strategy because I think white doesn't bring enough artifact fodder to the table. But it was a cute interaction.
The other thing with this card that I completely missed is it's 2 damage to any target. When I first read this card, I thought it was 2 damage to face only.
No, to any target. It can kill.
2 damage to any target is actually pretty...
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
It has potential. It just needs to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
So, actually, with blue-red, you can get the spacecraft that returns 2 things to hand.
Yeah.
Bam.
Is that non-creature? What's that card called?
That non-spacecraft. Oh, maybe it can't. Maybe it's only creature.
It might only be creatures.
Yeah, it might be only creatures. Shame.
The card is called Specimen Freighter.
Yeah.
2 creatures, yeah.
Oh, damn it. There goes the dream. Okay, so shocking, but the most dominant card in the good weapons manufacturing decks was Rust Harvester.
Yeah.
And Rust Harvester is a dream come true for that kind of thing. Yeah, you can exile something, pink something. You need to have artifacts. They need to end up in the graveyards, whatever. Then we have Melded Moxide. And that's just another generic artifact. It will make you a munition. It will not bring you closer to sacrificing it.
That one's 2 generic artifacts, in fact.
Yeah, mono is... Yeah, exactly. Mono is Circuit Feeder. Non-token, so one of them is a token, so only non-token will trigger, by the way.
Yeah.
But you have Monoist Circuit Feeder, Dauntless Scrapbot, Felgraph Ship, Warmaker Gunship. All of these are just generically good artifacts. And I think that this is how you should approach this card. I have a good artifact deck, which is good on its own merit. I can put the weapons manufacturing in there, and it might win some games. And then maybe you have like a couple of things that can sacrifice it, like Slag Drill Scrapper is, I think, the only thing on that list that could sacrifice things reliably.
And I'm honestly surprised to see that card at the end of the list. I would expect it to be much higher, but I will point out on this list it is like a who's who of good red rares, which I think is a bad sign for this card. In
It
general.
is a slightly bad card. I think that the problem that you will find with the analysis that I did here is that people can figure out that Scrapper is good in that deck, and that therefore Scrapper will be in the good decks and in the bad decks.
Right,
I had
right.
the same thing with the when we're going to talk about Terra symbiosis about the green X insect that puts
Aha.
counters on each
Yeah.
other. It was in both of the good decks and the bad decks, and it didn't make a difference because both of them had it. It was not the card that was making a difference. Now these are the cards that are making a difference. And
Mhm.
yes, you have the Rust Harvester, you have the Gunship, you have the Nova Hellkite, you have the Mutinous Massacre. So there are definitely some good rares on that list. But there are some cards that are not good rares, like Melded Moxite. That clearly is something important for those decks.
And
It's an
also,
artifact. Yep.
I think Alex mentioned this on his podcast too, but Moxite is so good because it digs you to weapons manufacturing. And it also digs, once you have manufacturing, it also digs you to your sacrifice outlets.
Yeah.
So the cards that help you see more of your deck are really important when you're doing build arounds.
And then yeah, again, Self-Craft Mechan somehow appeared there, so it doesn't necessarily have to be black red, I guess. But the rest of it's just black red.
Yeah. I would expect some of the good weapons manufacturing decks to be 3 color. Um, like
This
Grixis.
is actually the topic of the Alex's episode, by the way, chat. If you didn't listen to it, which you should, it was working in Grixis colors and Edge of Eternities. And here are the bad cards for that deck. And Cavern Turbo Drone comes up on top, and then Weft Stalker Ardent. Couple of cards that are surprising: Orbital Plunge, Orplate Pangolin,
Those are very surprising to me. I would
Bombard.
expect, yeah, Bombard too, yeah. I think,
Pressurize, I guess.
yeah, notably some of the black aggressive cards like Sunset Saboteur and Hilderblade, um, those really point you to not you need to be in like a kind of a dirtily deck to play this card because I think you just need to see enough cards to get the synergy off.
I think so, yeah, and yeah, definitely, but definitely not too slow because Pinnacle Killship is also
Yeah.
on the naughty list.
Yeah.
I think that the biggest surprise for me was the Pangolin because that card looks like important for the artifact decks, but somehow not for these decks, and I still don't know exactly how to explain the presence of that Orplate Pangolin on the being so predominantly. Maybe it's because it's an easier card to get, even if the lane that you really are looking for is not open.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's as far as I got with the explanation there. Okay, anyway, now we have our last exercise before we can finalize our thoughts and maybe come up with some discussions/conclusions. And it's Terra Symbiosis. Did you have an experience with this card?
I
By the
have
way,
I haven't
before
cast
you
this one.
go, just to give what it does: 2 and a green enchantment. When you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, you may draw that many cards. Do this only once each turn. So first time when you put counters on something, you draw that many cards. So
I also haven't cast this one.
okay,
I honestly don't even know if I've played against it. I've watched people play with it.
I
This
think
one,
that some
go ahead.
people are swearing by that card.
Yes.
I'm not
I
one of
think
them, but
this has similar tension to the last 2 cards that we saw because this is effectively a card draw engine, and you don't want to put a card draw engine in your aggressive deck, especially one that doesn't draw you cards immediately. Um, so you want a deck that wants to see additional cards. Like this card's gonna be really bad if you're in an aggressive deck because aggressive decks want to live and die by the top 12 to 15 cards of their library, and sometimes you just don't. You don't really want to take a turn off to tap out for this, and you also, if you're only looking at the top slice of your library, you might just not have any of the counters cards with this card, so it just might not do anything. So you want to put this in a deck that wants to see additional cards, which is different than a lot of counters decks might want to do.
But just thank you to Rosemary T for the raid, by the way, and they do like it. So let's see. Ouroboros is really good with this. You'd be surprised. I think Ouroboros was somewhere in the list that of the cards that were. I mean, it's good. Don't get me wrong, it's good, but it was not predominantly in the best decks because maybe people that have Terra Symbiosis and Ouroboros lean too much on them on those two cards and don't think enough about the rest of their deck. So, what do you think? Which cards are going to be the most important ones for this deck if you would be thinking about it?
I think.
What type of deck is this? Is this a Gene Pollinator deck?
I would guess yes. I would guess that Gene Pollinator does work with Terra Symbiosis. I think that this is a card I would want in a more mid-rangey green deck, one that's not super low to the ground, and I think that means often with green that you're going to be splashing. Don't think you want this in like the Thawbringer Ice Cave Crasher type of deck. Let me just pull up a list of cards with counters. That might be cheating. Drix Fatemaker, I think, is going to be an overperformer here because that puts a counter on something 2 different times. I would also guess Intrepid Tenderfoot as a card that you can activate each turn to draw a card. And also like just having that available, even if you don't have another card in your hand. That's another thing with this card is once you're using it to draw cards, it's going to find more cards that do the thing for you. So it's really important to be able to consistently trigger this. Like you can't just draw 2 cards off of it and call it a day. Like I think you want enough cards in your deck that you can trigger early and keep triggering it as the game goes on.
Okay, well let's see what is there on the list. And what actually when you see the things, most of the time it's just good green-white cards. However, there is this block of creatures up to the top that include Rayblade Trooper, which is sort of better version of Drix.
Yeah, Drix Fatemaker.
Yeah, it's just a better in any aspect. It puts 2 counters, 2 instances of counter putting, and is a better creature. There's the Diadrine that puts X counters. This is the better version of the X Warp Green guy, as Rosemary T.
Yeah, I love Diadrine. I played with that card a lot. That card's awesome.
There is Halia, Ascendant Cadet, which draws you even more cards after you put the counters. But there are cards like Meltstrider's Resolve, Starfield Shepherd, sort of like cards that tell me mid-range more than anything. Because like Meltstrider's Resolve is slightly better on the larger creature generally. Starfield Shepherd is getting you lands to advance your game past turn 5 rather than, creating gigantic pressure early in the game. Auxiliary boosters, these are also better in the late game because you can start pushing damage in the skies. And that's a better plan for like a deck that has already some mana presence and some board presence and larger creatures.
I'm intrigued by Exosuit Savior too. I think that's a good one for this type of thing too. Like picking your Rayblade Trooper or your Dockworker drone back up is really powerful when you can trigger Terra Symbiosis again too. So I really like that one on here as well.
And when you think about other cards that you have in this deck, like on this list, picking up Starfield Shepherd and picking up a Meltstrider's Resolve is also not a bad thing because you're playing this mid-range kind of game. And I guess that this is the key secret of Terra Symbiosis. You don't want to play it in an aggressive deck. You want to play it in a more mid-range value-focused kind of deck.
Yeah, because an aggressive deck, like, would you play Divination in an aggressive deck? Like some of them, yes, but that's not really maximizing what a Divination wants to do. And I think
it's just the counters maybe confuse us, and then because putting counters on creatures sounds aggressive, but actually it doesn't have to. So.
Yeah, and so many of these cards are it's not cards that put counters on creatures. It's creatures that come with a +1/+1 counter stapled to them already.
Yeah, and just to give you the thing. The X Warp Green guy was on the list, but it didn't make the top 15 cards because it was people always want to put it together with Terra Symbiosis. So even in the losing decks, it was quite predominant that that card was in there.
I
It's
can't
just that
stand.
this is not the card that makes the biggest difference. The biggest difference, I think, is that philosophical approach of what do you want to be doing with your Terra Symbiosis. And this is being a mid-range deck, being a deck that plays a longer game rather than super aggressive kind of uh, beat down deck.
Yeah,
And
you
I
can
think
see
that,
Radiant Strike on this list too. Is another good one.
yeah, exactly. If you have a Radiant Strike, then are you truly aggressive? You can't put it in your deck just hoping that you're gonna that opponent is gonna play artifact creature that you can kill before you can attack. You
Yeah.
have to be someone that is half expecting being attacked. What are the rubbish cards on the list? Well, first of all, swamps and islands make it. So clearly, Terra Symbiosis is a white green card, and Plains was just outside of that list, behind Spellbringer. By the way, I just made a. I'm making strict cutoffs, and sometimes you miss out interesting pieces of data through that. But I prefer to do my strict cutoffs when I can give commentary on. But there are also cards that you wouldn't expect. Melt Strider Eulogist, for example. What do you think about that card? That's the
I
three
think
three
that's
that.
people leaning too hard into the counter stuff and less into just play a normal deck that has a bunch of things that put counters incidentally.
Okay, Galactic Wayfarer. What do you think about this gentleman
I
on the
don't know.
list?
I don't know what to say about that one. I'm not going to cut a Galactic Wayfarer deck from
I,
my
I
deck
I
in a
would
Terra
think that it's
Symbiosis
maybe
deck.
that people when once they put Galactic Wayfarer, they're just urged to splash, and maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, like Sammy's Curiosity is a card that I wouldn't
Hmm.
expect to be the worst card here. I
Command Bridge again.
yeah, fungal Colossus also.
Yeah. So maybe just try to stick to your green white mid range and don't be too cute with multiple colors. I guess.
Because if you're splashing, you can find a different card advantage
Survey
spell.
Mechan, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. If you have access to blue mana, you can just put Cerebral Download in your deck, and it's gonna be
Yeah,
good.
and it's better than Terra Symbiosis, or dare I even say Cryogen Relic, if you manage to get one in this
If you
account.
should be so lucky.
Armorix comment on the chat. You just spent 3 mana to maybe draw some cards later, then you drop Eulogist, which doesn't do anything until the creature which already drew your card dies. That's just wheel spinning.
Yeah,
And I do totally agree with that. So I think that the lessons from today is that build arounds probably should be left. You can't forget about the aspect of having a good deck while building around. And I
yeah,
think that it's part of the nature of those cards because they don't offer clear solutions on their own. I think that in Bloomborough, when I drafted a lot of Builder's Talent decks, Builder's Talent was an easy build around because you sort of like, okay, I'm just going to put non-creature spells and then it's going to come together somehow.
and a lot of
But
those non-creature spells in Bloomburrow were colorless, also.
yeah, but here I think that these are more prescriptive in terms of what I need to be doing to get the value out of my card, but less prescriptive on how should I build my deck. While I think Builder's Talent made it easier to build a coherent deck that had a certain coherent plan. Look, it makes an O4. Clearly, I'm not attacking with that thing. While
Yeah,
these ones are trickier, and you need to figure out first what should be the general plan of your deck be, and then how you build around it, because that's the easy part. I looked at those data from the 17 land user, and all of them figured out that if you play Terra Symbiosis, you should put token generators. Everyone did it, but only some of them trophied after that. And these are the ones that not only figured out that you have to put the counters, but also figured out that you need to have that mid-range kind of game plan.
yeah,
Does that make
yeah.
sense? Cool.
Makes sense to me.
So I would say that the conclusions, the card that required building around tempt you to go all in into that build around. But maybe this is not necessarily the way. Maybe they should be treated more like an addition to a fully functional deck that has a plan, and you add them not because you're a build around, but because they sort of naturally fit into the plan that you already had before. And maybe you make some concessions to that plan. You know, maybe you had a green white mid range deck, but you will put a couple of extra token cards, counters cards. But that's about it when you want to invest. Because if they don't align with your general plan, then you're probably mutilating your deck and causing more damage than benefit by putting those in. And
Right.
your deck will pull in like opposite. Like you try to be aggressive, but at the same time you have this card that draws you cards, and it's pulling in the opposite directions, and sort of ruining your game plan.
And there's something to be said about like for a build around if you just want to do the thing, like if you just want to point at the screen and say, "Look, I drew my cards off Terra Symbiosis," like you can put all the counter stuff in your deck to do that, but actually converting that into wins, you really need to think about what the reward is actually giving you. Like in Terra Symbiosis, if you're going like 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop in my green white aggressive deck, like you don't really need to draw cards to win the game. At least if your plan is going to according to plan.
Yeah, you'll probably be better with having the combat trick
Yeah, exactly.
to top it up. All right. Do you have any closing statements about this episode, or any kind of like thoughts that you had? I know that you have a long list of bullet points, and I don't know if we touched on all of them. So,
Yeah, we got to all of them. Yeah.
We got
Thanks
through
for
all of them.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Basically, it wasn't a long list.
I thought that like this episode helped me to sort of formulate in my head how I will approach building around in the future, and I think that this is quite useful as a conceptual way of building around is supplementing your main plan rather than building a new plan in some cases, and in some cases it's going to be more building around. But I
Yeah.
think that I was approaching every build around in the same way conceptually, and I think that looking through those data and figuring out what to talk about you when I was preparing for the episode sort of put me on the track of that. You know what, maybe my approach to building around was not completely right.
And I think the like Wizards approach to build arounds also has changed. Like when we moved to play boosters, there was like all the articles about how their design shifted. And one of the points that they made was if there are more rares in the pack and if uncommons are more of a presence in the format, like they consciously started moving build arounds up to rare. That's something they explicitly called out. And we see that here with like weapons manufacturing, Terra Symbiosis, and other build arounds. I also thinking about like cursed recording in Duskmorn. Like just the fact that you can have something that does something sideways to what the color pairs are normally doing in the format. They can make that more powerful because it's at rare, because it comes up less often, and they can also make that more unique. Whereas other build arounds, I'm thinking like a bad example, but maybe like Roost of Drakes is just like put every card that says kicker in your deck and it's just going to work.
And it did.
And it did work very well. That's a different type of build around than something that does something really sideways, but has Rooster Drakes is a bad example because that card was just so busted. But they can push the ceilings on these build arounds higher because they're rare, but oftentimes that means it's going to be more niche and harder to crack.
Okay, let's switch the Roost of Drakes to Zenith Flare. That's a less powerful build.
Yeah, we can talk Zenith Flare then.
I mean, there were some good build arounds, but they were always like, oh, maybe Disinformation Campaign is a better example.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, where they have to. I mean, that card was really good, but they do have to rein that one in a little bit. That one was really strong too. Just to, like having build arounds at uncommon rather than rare means they have to rein it in a little bit. Otherwise, maybe Roost of Drakes is a good example because that card was so powerful. Like it was just the best uncommon in the format.
Yeah, or the Wall 1/1 maker, whatever, Wing Chaplain.
Yeah, Wingmantle Chaplain.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe it's moving.
You see the theme there. You see the theme.
We can't think of any like medium build arounds from the old set.
Well, no, we thought about the perfect medium build around. Builder's Talent was a sweet medium build around. Yeah. It's not too powerful, but can be quite game warping in some games, and it requires some sweet building around where it was not prescriptive as what you want to be doing. Yes, you need to play non-creature permanents, but these range from Fountain Port Bell to Banishing Light.
Yeah.
While Wingmantle Chaplain, does it say Defender? Yes. Okay. In the deck you go. Zenith Flare. Does it have cycling? Yes. Okay, in the deck. And then Roost of Drakes, does it have kicker? Yeah, in the deck. It's not like it's maybe bad incentives of building around. It's like sometimes, do you play like Once Upon a Time Galaxy?
No, I don't play that.
Well, some builds in that game are like forcing you to play spells until the end of the game. So each turn you can either pick a creature or cast a spell when you are building your army or whatever. And there are some cards that just force you to play a spell. And you only get one random spell and you have a choice of 3 different creatures every turn. So if you're forced to play a spell, independently of what it is, it's not very interesting, is it?
Right. Yeah. I see.
But because you remove yourself to any choice, you just like, oh, I will default, I'll cast a spell. I don't care about what's going on, I just cast a spell.
Yeah.
And I think that this is the same with those build arounds that like, I just need to pick cycling cards. I just don't care about anything else anymore.
Yeah. I'm a big play booster fan, but I love the change of moving build arounds to rare. I think that really gives them a lot more room to do cool things. And we've seen that out with like Cursed Recording.
Cursed Recording was a cool build around because again, you have to put the non-creature spells, but they do very different things.
Yeah.
So it's not just like same thing just for the sake of it. So you don't always want to copy them. You have the limitation on it. It was super sweet.
Yeah.
Super sweet. And I'm really hoping that we're going to live through a golden age of the build-arounds once they figure out the secret sauce and formula. But I think that the secret sauce is keeping them fresh and unique.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long they can live with that. It's like, honestly, like if you would take the whole of the last year, Builder's Talent was by far my most favorite card of the year, bar none. Even though I was not like super big on Bloomborough, I just there's something about it. It was so good, and it was so close to being playable and constructed, but never made it.
It's still in standard.
In Omniscience, huh?
Yeah.
Makes an 0-4, blocks you, and then reanimates your Omniscience.
Wow, that's true.
Yeah, it does everything in that deck. It was just 1 mana too expensive to be playable and constructed.
Right.
What a time it would have been to be alive. Because after that, when we start the game, you just make insane things with Omniscience and this on board. Oh, but okay. Anything that you want to plug before we go?
I can plug my podcast, Rough Drafts. You can find it basically anywhere you do podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Post my link tree in the chat.
I'll put it in the description after I force myself to download it and make it a video and upload it as a podcast. But I will do it. I will do it eventually. Very cool.
I'm on most social media platform I'm active on the most is Blue Sky, where I'm just at sampratt.bsky.social. Active on Discord too, Sam P6.
Samp is also in my Discord. So if you join my Discord, you get a Samp for free, sort of.
You can get me for free.
Yeah. Anything that you're planning soon, apart from Skeleton Crew, hopefully in a month or so?
Yeah, Skeleton Crew. I think, assuming we have enough players, I'm going to stream on my Twitch channel a draft of my Arena Cube tonight in a couple hours.
Ooh.
We'll see. I think we have enough people. So yeah, my Twitch is Sam P.
Let me know. I would be happy to join the next time. Not today, but next time.
I can invite you to the Discord. Yeah, we've been. My cube's gonna be at CubeCon next month, so we've been testing.
Ooh, nice.
A lot of testing, and it's just fun to draft it. So
I'm sure it's a very considerate build of a cube in general, because I know that you love your limited.
Yes.
All right. Well, with that, thank you very much for being here. It's always a pleasure, and I really wanted to make that episode. That's why I reached out and said if you wanted to pop in and just chat about data and your philosophy of approaching it, because I think that you have this very healthy mixture of you're very good in theory crafting, but you're also not adverse towards the use of data. And I think that this is like the healthiest approach that you can do, not exaggerating it in any way, but knowing the limitations of every approach. And I find it cool. But today I also learned that not only you know the limitations, but you also know them well, because you know that early data is useful. You know that the later in the format, the less important the data is, because you got already your baseline, and then you can start applying your own judgment, and they start superseding the data and stuff.
Yeah,
So it
that's
was
something I didn't mention, but everyone is different. Like everyone has different play styles. Everyone likes to draft different things, and you have to figure out what you're having success with in the format. And sometimes that's just not going to disagree with the data, and you shouldn't fight that. You should go with what you're good at. So
yeah, exactly. Because again, you're looking at the data that is the agglomerated win rate of dozens of play styles.
yeah, right.
And you can't just work around it. I try to add as much granularity to the data as physically possible.
Yeah,
but I cannot like ask every 7 minutes. So are you more of an aggro player or more of a control player?
Yeah.
Just doesn't work like that. So you have to keep in mind that there are caveats with data anytime. And yeah, you should start by knowing yourself. And I think that exploring data is a good tool for self-discovery as well. So
Yep.
do that. All right. As always, thanks to 17 Lands for providing us with that said data. And thanks to Fake Jake Brown for being a good person. And I just always thank him out of habit. And he made my logo. That counts for something. So yeah, with that, I'll see you next week. I might be on one of the niche limited podcasts this week. So depending on Louis and Marshall, I guess. But I will try to also make a normal episode at some stage. So watch that space. Okay, see you next week.
See ya. Thanks for having me.